Hello, welcome to the Austin Parks Foundation's Park Summit series. We're so happy you've joined us today. To learn more about the series or view recordings of previous sessions, please visit www.austinparks.org/parks-summit. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our newsletter for up-to-date information on the Summit series and APF's other programs. A bit of housekeeping before we introduce our panelists. If you RSVP'd for the event, you will receive a follow-up email with helpful links and information related to the session, with a recorded version for your reference. You can also view the full recording on our website or YouTube channel. Today, we are so pleased to bring you our session entitled Digital Dialogues, Public Participation in the COVID-19 Era. We will be discussing the importance of public participation and decision-making for public-facing projects like park improvements, as well as what we have learned during the pandemic and how we might apply those lessons to the future. We want to give a warm welcome to our panelists today, who I will quickly introduce and then let them tell you about their work through our discussion. We have Laura Cortez, founder and CEO of Cortez Consulting, Miriam Connor, community organizer and curator for Public City, Meredith Powell, co-founder of Public City, and Cynthia Rodriguez, outreach manager for Austin Parks Foundation. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. I'll get started with the questions since we have a lot to cover in an hour. First, I'd just love for each of you to tell us a bit more about yourselves and about the types of public projects you work on. And Miriam, if you want to get us started, that would be great.
Definitely. So at Public City, we do arts-based community engagement, ensuring that real communities, socially and culturally, are part of nonprofit and institutional projects or programs. A lot of things that we do is we help build a bond or a trust with community and the entity by using art as a medium to converse the understanding and literally break down the barrier of language and just of purely being human. So one of the projects that we have worked on is with Downtown Austin Alliance, or DAA, I might say DAA, just in case. But it was to understand the community's future vision of downtown. We engaged more than 50 zip codes in Austin and created this table where the community wrote down or drew on 1-foot pieces of wood what they want their downtown to be. And then we commissioned a local artist to build a table that we then put in Republic Square Park. So that's one project. I'll do one more, and then I know Meredith has more too. Another project was we're going into the second phase of the Pillars project with Austin Parks Foundation. And it was based on Eastling Trail, which is a 5-mile trail that goes from Bartholomew up north all the way down to Town Lake or Lady Bird Lake. And we heard from multiple community members that they wanted these pillars underneath the Rosewood or Pleasant Valley Bridge on Rosewood painted. And so we collected oral histories from people that have historical lived experiences along the trail and commissioned 6 artists in the first phase. And now we're moving into 9 more pillars to be commissioned. So that was really exciting.
Oh yeah, we're super excited about that project.
Meredith, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. So as Miriam mentioned, we've been able to work on a lot of really interesting, amazing projects that have been kind of transformational or impactful. In Austin, we've worked in Texas and across the country. And a lot of I ran an arts organization for 10 years before we started Public City. So as Miriam mentioned, a lot of our work is it's arts-based, and the majority of it is also place-based. And that scale kind of, grows and shrinks. Sometimes the scale is a 5-mile trail or, 10-mile trail. Sometimes it's an entire downtown, where we've done strategies also for, state of Connecticut for their arts plans. So, our work varies on size, but at the heart of it is really working with artists to help connect with the community so that the communities really have the power to shape the future of the spaces and places that are really special to them.
This is all wonderful. I love being among friends and colleagues doing place-based community engagement. It definitely is at the heart of what we do with Cortez Consulting as well. And, we started about 6 years ago, and one of our first engagements was actually an open spaces and parks project. It was for the swimming pool, and we were doing the aquatic master plan. And I just remember tabling at some of the pools. There were so many across Austin at the time. My organization was very small. So I looked to family and friends to help me gather data. And it was just a rewarding experience to see how important, something like a pool is to so many people in Austin. And that really launched my organization. And I was just really inspired, strongly supported, as always, by Austin Parks Foundation, the PARD department. And we've since then been growing and doing different types of projects all across the city. We're really excited to really continue to work. Mainly our work is in the Eastern Crescent. We really focus on a particular niche. I always wanted to have an organization that was really being a voice for those individuals who traditionally are not part of the public planning process. And I know many of you guys feel the same way and focus on that. But I wanted to make sure all my work was bilingual, was serving communities who traditionally would say, like, I don't know if I should have a voice in this project. And so we traditionally work on the east side of Austin. We've done some transportation projects. We currently work in the Colony Park area on redevelopment projects. We'll be working on several others on Balm Road and those types of areas. So that's a little bit about what our organization does. But as well, we do a variety of sizes and different types all across the city. Cynthia, how about you?
Well, thank you. I'm the outreach manager with Austin Parks Foundation. In my role, I've been fortunate enough to be able to work with all of you all during different parks projects. So grateful to have had that opportunity. In my role as outreach manager, I just really meet with the community and to share more about APF programs and resources. I think for me, at the center of like what community engagement and outreach is just informing folks about what is available. And I think that's like the first step in eliminating barriers to participation. So just being able to connect with neighbors about what is available for park improvement projects. And then also doing outreach around some of our park projects. The community engagement process before any park improvement project is quite lengthy, right? Even it starts from the very beginning. When we do community meetings, doing surveying and just trying to gather as much feedback as possible so that we're aware of what the community desires are for each space, and maybe making sure that the work that we're doing reflects that. So that's kind of generally what I do.
Thank you. I'm sort of curious. I mean, it's wonderful to hear about the projects you all have been involved with. Just to kind of give a baseline, for our audience, who a lot of whom are very involved in their own communities, but might not always know sort of the tenets of good public participation and community engagement in the way that you all frame it. Why is it important for the community to have input on a public project? And Laura, I'm going to start with you this time.
Great. This is a really great question. I often put my thinking hat on as to if it was my neighborhood or a street that I frequented or a park that I used, how would I feel if there was a change happening, or how that would affect my children, or how that would affect any families. And so one of the reasons why I think it's really important to have the community voices is because most people want you to do projects with them and not at them or for them. And oftentimes what happens, just like any other project, even if you're working in your own project, you have a timeline. People have certain expectations of what needs to be done. And I often think, how can we get to the community as quickly as we can when we start working on a project? Once I kind of have my parameters of what the project's expectations are, I very quickly want to get to community leaders, everyday folks, schools, just any kind of groups that are organized in that particular community, and talk to them first and say, this is coming, as Cynthia said, informing, this is coming your way. What do you know about it? How would you like to be involved? And then just educating them about the process. Every community engagement project has a process. There's usually some timeline of when a deliverable is expected or information. And so that's what we go through. And I always want our organization, in some cases, as much as I can, and sometimes we get a lot of slack for this, but we always want the community to know what's happening and for it not to be a surprise. I think oftentimes projects can get derailed when community members say, we're just hearing about this for the first time, or you do all this great work behind the scenes to get the community meeting ready. You get this public meeting announcement out and all these things, but no one had any information prior to the planning of that meeting. So I really believe that it's extremely important to go hand in hand when you're working on community engagement projects with individuals who want to be involved. And not everybody's interested. Everybody has their typical types of things they want to do. But I really believe it's important to do projects with the community and not at them or for them.
I completely agree. I think that the decision-making needs to be in the hands of the people that it affects, purely and simply. And putting the power back into the hands of the community is what we need to do right now, especially within these times of transition and of change and of vulnerability. Right now is the time to actually put that power back into the community's hands.
Yeah, and I think that by including the community in your community engagement, you are respectful of the work that has come before you. I mean, as you all mentioned, like getting to know like the community leaders who've been active for years, many times decades, and have already been working to bring changes to their parks and green spaces. So it helps plug you into like where people are at and like the history of what they've done so that you can best figure out, how to support them. And I think, we really view like the residents as experts of their own community. They're the eyes and ears of their neighborhood, and they can best share what it is that their community has expressed a desire in, or like where the needs are. So yeah, plugging into them is just really essential before we do any projects.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. And, I think from my perspective, place is very personal. I'm connected to my neighborhood, the neighborhood that I live in, I've been involved in. I've helped shape it. It's helped shape me. And I think when people, when a project comes to their neighborhood, if they haven't initiated it, I think that's a lot of people want to do projects in Austin. And if the community hasn't initiated it themselves, there's a question there as to why this is happening. If I, as a community member, are unaware of it or haven't initiated this, I think place, it's just personal. And when you want to be involved in your community, I believe that there's a role to play in shaping it. I think in a city like Austin in particular, it's changing so rapidly, and you can quickly feel that, perhaps I don't fit in this community anymore, or maybe look up one day and it looks a lot different than it did, a few years back, and you start to sort of disengage a little bit. And I think, for some of our work at Public City, at least, the community not only has the power to shape it, but are the stewards for its future. And from that perspective, really thinking about the community as and the power to steward your future, your neighborhood, your parks, your all of it that make your pools, everything that makes your neighborhood or your community feel like yours. That for me is one of the most I'm so grateful to be able to work on projects where that's the context in which we're working, and the communities, the places that have defined them and they've defined really reflect, who they are moving forward, and also who they've been in the past. So, I think for and not every community member, as Laura said, wants to be involved, but those who do, it's just when a community is willing to share their stories, and the moments that they've shared in those places, it's just really powerful. And what a foundation to build this city on, where the community is at the table really driving its future.
Yeah, I agree too. I think we have a community initiated projects grants program. So all of the grants that people apply for are really projects that start in the community. And you can really see such a difference in how the improvement is used afterwards. Just people are so interested in going to that pavilion or that playscape or that, amenity, because it was their idea, it came from them. It met a specific need that they called out. So I definitely agree with everyone. So thinking about, and really I'm kind of framing this in before times, without the constraints of COVID, which we'll get into later. What do you all think as professionals are the best practices if there are no sort of, pandemic constraints, for example? And Meredith, we'll start with you this time.
Wow, we learn something new every project in every community. And I think, one of the most important things that we really commit to in our work is trust in this work is critical. Building trust with the communities is, and in this city, and I don't know, we've run across this in other cities and communities across the country, but a lot of times this is not the first project that a community has been, that has come to a community. And so sometimes there's a legacy of mistrust. In fact, where institutions or, just say institutions in general, have not treated the community with the respect that they deserve, that their lived experiences, as Cynthia said, are the experts in their neighborhood. And I think from our perspective, respecting the existing community and spending the time to build the trust with them is foundationally critical. And so as one of the, and a lot of times, that's both, working with the community on the ground, but also with the client or institution that we're hired by, is ensuring that institution or that organization or whatever the case may be, is truly willing to listen and to make decisions based on, the power the community has. And so I feel like from our perspective, from my perspective, the trust and respect of the communities that we're working in are just foundational practices for us. And there's many more, but I mean, I think those two, and I'll give up the floor, but are for us just absolutely critical.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what I was going to say is similar in that I think some of the best practices we follow kind of are basically like incorporating a mix of community engagement practices and outreach strategies. And I think differentiating the two is important because I think at the heart of community engagement is the relationship building and the trust that comes with the relationship building. And it's really key in doing any of our work because it's important to get to know the stakeholders who are, invested in the work that we're doing and just really find out more about their histories and like what they want and what they've seen. So it takes more time, and because it takes time to get to know somebody and it takes time to build a relationship and develop that trust, but it's very critical, I think, to community engagement. And then, like I said, I think also like incorporating though, outreach strategies as well, so that you can just really like expand your net and try to reach as many people as possible, so that you can hopefully try to get as many people as possible in like the different ways that they want to engage. So I think the outreach that we do doesn't always involve like even like having conversations. It could just be like leaving a flyer at a door, or leaving yard signs. It's more like to disseminate information, whereas like community engagement is more just relationship building and trust building. So I think differentiating between those two and knowing, I think for us, like Kathleen, we've talked about that a lot, just like the importance of having like a mixture of both and just having like a variety of strategies, so that you can try to reach as many people as possible.
And I love what you both are saying, because when we say relationships are a two-way street, right? It is a understanding and learning and building. And Meredith, I loved also that you said the client, because as you're working in the community and you're learning these assets to build the trust with the community, you also have to share that, because it makes the project in general better, makes everyone better for the work they're doing. We often hear that, well, we did this on this project, but we have to kind of tell our clients, and we often have to do this at Cortez Consulting as well, as say like what you learned in that project and in that community, there could be some lessons learned that you could apply, but this is completely unique. And oftentimes when you're building a relationship with the community, you may hear of things that they need that may not be relevant to your project. And what we do is we often say, how can I be a resource to you? Mm-hmm. So if I'm already working on a separate project and I know that you need research with rent assistance, and I'm working on a transportation project and I know somebody to connect you, that is part of what's building the trust and the relationship, is saying, I can be available to you in all different ways and not try to be everything to that particular project or community, but saying, if we're asking them for feedback, we're asking them to get involved, it does not take us very much as an individual doing the work in that community to say, how can I be a resource to you? And we often find that, and during pre-COVID times, we were doing resource fairs. We were constantly having events with multiple facets to it. So we just wouldn't have just a meeting, but we would also have a meeting where people could come and gain resources. They could talk to other individuals while you have them there at the time. So that was just some of our best practices that we try to implement.
Yeah. So I think we've all talked about the spectrum of community engagement to ownership, which was done by Rosa Gonzalez from Facilitating Power. I'm just going to go through a couple of those. So it's number one, you want to be at 5, right? 1 is inform, which it's just getting information to community. 2 is consult, which is gathering the input from community. 3 is involve, getting the voice of the community integrated with the process and informing the plan, right? And then there's collaborate, which is number 4, which is actually delegating that power. And the 5th one, which we need to get to with every project, is deferring to community ownership and giving that power actually into the community's hands. That being said, with giving the community that power, that ownership, that is gatekeeping. And with respect to actual real community, gatekeepers are different from people that are actually on the ground, that don't have the information, or that haven't ever been consulted with, or that have never been involved or collaborated with. So it's when gatekeeping, because we're all gatekeepers, we need to actually bring along the people, our neighbors, and inform them and educate them and consult them and involve them to get everybody's hands with the experiences and the histories that they have all learned from, so that we can all learn together. So like by speaking for people, we're perpetuating the same system that we were trying to get out of, which is a different system within the community. However, it's institution community, but it's still the same system of thinking and making decisions for people, not with people. So we need to bring everybody along. Just
absolutely. So in our work in particular, we work with a lot of neighborhood groups. And when they do projects, we encourage them and try to help them, give them resources and guidance on community engagement. And a lot of times questions that come up are around, well, how far do I, this is a pocket park or a neighborhood park. How many people do I need to survey or ask or get the opinion of before we kind of say we have we've reached some sort of ideal or at least adequacy. And I'm sorry, there are flies in my house. I don't know if everyone else is having this issue right now. Maybe it's just me. Hopefully not. But anyway, so every so often I have to do this. So I understand this question is difficult to answer because there's a lot of different answers. But what I, kind of want to convey to our audience is what are sort of your ideal kind of balances of geographic spread and what kind of factors go into that? So like, depending on a project, what would you feel like, okay, we've really achieved our goals in terms of the reach of our community engagement? And then tell us a little bit about the kind of factors that might go into that. Cynthia, if you want to get us started.
Sure. I think, what we generally start with is just identifying the various stakeholders that are in the area. So I think if you're part of a park adopter group and you're wanting to bring some improvements to the park, I think that would be like the first thing is just identifying who else is in your neighborhood, what other groups exist in your neighborhood who are already part of like an existing community group who you can reach out to. Because I think the most important thing I think that you want to consider is that you are getting feedback from as many stakeholders as possible. So identifying the stakeholders who are already there is like a good place to start. And then you want to reach out to the folks who are not part of those groups, but who still are important to, whose voice is still important and who still you want to get, their opinions on things. So I think what we do with our projects is we identify the stakeholders within a mile from the park, and then we identify other ways that we can reach other folks who may not be involved with those groups. And again, like trying different strategies to try to reach as many people. Because I think ultimately you want to make sure that the responses that you receive are reflective of the folks who live in the neighborhood, so that they are reflective of the demographics of the area. So those are kind of strategies that we incorporate. We have different ways. So we have like surveys that people have an opportunity to participate in our like bilingual surveys. We've also made like hard copies available for folks who need that, scheduling those like community meetings. But essentially it's all with the same goal. It's just trying to reach as many people who live in the area and making sure that the folks who are participating, that it looks like the demographics of that area.
Agree again. And I think it's dependent for Public City, it's dependent on what the goals of each project are. And then historically, the community ownership of whatever piece or place that historically has happened in the past, and who has owned it and who lived around it. So for instance, for Eastlink, we engaged about a half mile around the trail because it's literally in people's backyards and people along the trail actually have histories. Whereas for the community's table, it's everybody's downtown. Everybody goes to downtown or not, but it's not just downtown's downtown or the people that live in downtown or the businesses that go downtown. And so that's why we expanded to 57 zip codes, right? So it's project dependent.
Yeah, and I think who is this project meant to serve, right? So with like in the Eastlink example, it's meant to serve the communities directly along the trail first and foremost. With downtown, it's meant to serve the entire city. And even beyond that, but it must serve the citizens of Austin first. And even if they're not being served now, why are they not being served? And how can we move towards that, looking at the vision of downtown? So I think, in addition to working with the goals of the client and the project, also, who is this project serving most, or who does it need to serve, and kind of thinking about it like that.
And sometimes in our case, our team, we've been working on a long-term project, and many times you'll have long-term projects, if it's a master development or if it's a district park, those can kind of be longer term. And I recall recently, before COVID, when we were out flyering and we were kind of talking to different food trucks, and someone mentioned like, oh, you guys are the people that do these things. And those are when I feel most satisfied, or I feel just like we've done our part. When they start, as Miriam was saying, when you empower them to know that this is what you're doing, this is how I want to be involved in it, and this is a project going on in my neighborhood, and you guys have been doing this work. And so there's those longer term projects. And then I also think of projects from the user perspective. So right now, we're really excited. We're working on the Colony Park pool project. They have not had a pool since Austin's been here. This has been a community that's just been wanting this resource. And so we actually, as part of the project, said we want to go to the user. Well, traditionally, when you have these public meetings, and we've been having them virtually, they're members of the community, they're working individuals. And, we said we want to go to the kids. And so we were really fortunate to work with the schools that are surrounding this pool. Now, everybody across the city, as Miriam mentioned and Meredith mentioned, there's projects, this pool is probably going to also be for future people that move to that area. But we actually were really fortunate to collaborate with coaches and teachers. And they were just like, how could this be an education experience for the kids? Like, once you start construction, kids that maybe want to do that type of work, how can they come and learn about this? And it just became this beautiful experience. And so through that, my team worked really hard. We got on virtually. We did some demos, we did videos, and these kids think differently than the adult that's going to use the pool. They may be thinking about shade. The kids are like, what activities can I do? What's your programming? They thought about lighting. And so I think oftentimes we also need to think of the end user, and that it's not the traditional means that we may have to do outreach, but we learned so much from the students, and we had a broad reach. And I think sometimes we have to think of that too. It may not be the traditional means that you think of doing it, but who's the end user? Like, how are they going to take advantage of this? So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, kids have cool ideas. Adults, I don't know, kind of boring. So, I think that you all have painted a really wonderful picture of the importance of community engagement and why it's important to have robust community engagement, and kind of the ideals and best case scenarios, best practices. But obviously, this last year presented a lot of challenges for everyone. But with respect to this conversation, I'd love to know just sort of what this past year has been like for you as community engagement professionals. And, what are some triumphs, but also what are some challenges? I'm sure there are many to name. Miriam, if you want to get us started.
Totally. So one of the challenges that's been super eye-opening is the digital divide, and not being able to go and meet people where they are, obviously, because we can't, or now we kind of can, but figuring out how, we were starting up the engagement for our Feature 35, and boom, COVID hit. So we had to shift into this digital platform, but we still had to think about what if people don't have internet? What if people don't have computers or a cell phone? So we actually went into local radio stations and did programming. I think that was a huge triumph because people listen to the radio. Even during the winter storm, the radio was the only option for people to actually hear was information that was going on. And I think one of the things that I learned was that deadlines and time isn't as important as self-healing and taking care of your neighbors and checking in on people that we have worked with, and just seeing how they're doing. I think that's the most important thing, is human, just care and taking care of our neighbors. So.
I love it. I think that, one of the things that, and many of you may feel this way, I don't know how many new technologies we had to learn for gathering feedback, but oh my
Mhm.
goodness. It was, and then, I think also going back to the basics is what we kind of learned. I love, we just finished a phone campaign, and just being able to talk to people on the phone and then being like, thanks for calling. Like, and I mean, obviously some folks are like, who's calling? I don't recognize this number, but we leave a message and we say, we're just wanting to hear from you. Are you doing okay? Are there any resources that you need? 2 weeks ago, we did a 2-day block walk. We're able to do that now. It was nice. We weren't able to do that during the time. And so we ended up doing, PPE drives. And as everybody's sharing here, and Miriam, you shared it so graciously about, I think when we entered COVID, it was like we were thinking of how could we get out and just help people survive this situation. We were working with some of our partners on Wi-Fi access and how can we set up some of the buses to do that. And we were going to apartments and, food boxes, and working with the Central Texas Food Bank, where were areas, they were trying to do their very best just to get food out and distributed. But, we were also working with our neighbors and saying, where are we not going? And if you can't get to the distribution and wait in the long lines, what are some of the programs that are going on that we can get you to your door? And I think the beauty of what I saw was so many people who I know I've worked with in the community, just us all connecting and reaching out and saying, this is about how I can support you as an organization. We know you do this work, and how can we work together? So that was my biggest, and I get chills talking about it. People who called and just said, how are you doing and how's your company? And we were impacted significantly, but I also knew I had to take care of my little familia that was Cortez Consulting, and we've decided to now be home, and that's what we're going to do, and that's how we're going to function. So I think there's so many lessons learned and so many beautiful things I saw during the time. Although when it first happened, we were like, we do public engagement, what's going to happen? And go through that crisis, and then of course just rethink and reshift how we could do things.
Yeah, I think for us, the projects that we were working on, thankfully, I think the challenge became the triumph, right? Like truly, in a lot of ways, in the way of really being creative about how we were going to approach engagement that was still authentic and still was able to build trust and show the respect that the community deserves. And so that's got us into different types of engagement. We do a lot of, artist-based work, in person, active, shared experiences. And so, but that challenge of not having that opportunity, makes you think differently, and was able to shift our thinking in new creative ways that were more relevant for where the community was at the time, so like the radio or like the virtual series, and trying to balance that and offering many ways, to engage, both back to the basics, like Laura mentioned, but then also, back to the basics ended up being cool radio shows, with a distribution that was wider than we could have ever gotten if it was, on bikes on the trail. So, I think, and I think the seriousness of the seriousness of us all as a community and as one dealing with, the realities of COVID and literally people just trying to survive. That to us, it's like, well, we've got a job to do in terms of getting people to the table to think about I-35. But the reality is the community is just trying to survive. So to Laura's point and Miriam earlier, it's like, how can we become a resource then? How can this be worth it for a community member to participate, respecting where they are? Like some of our partners in conversations, it's like, the kids lost their parents, it was conditions that you would have never been aware of before or even thinking about that were top of mind. It's like the communities that we were that we really wanted, hope to hear from, were literally trying to survive. And that, while that was a challenge, I think to Laura's point, as a community coming together to sort of serve each other, and that relationship, that two-way, sometimes, you can get into a position where you're working in a community, the project's done, you move on. Well, that's just not the case anymore. You don't, that's, it's too important, and, to serve and to lead at the same time. So, I think the challenge is ultimately, the graciousness of the communities to continue to show up and to, continue to participate, even knowing that we're all just trying to survive, was something that, coming out of this year is just been, we can't go back, it's moving forward from in here and incorporating all of the things that we learn, and even just the humanity of the work that we're doing and the opportunities that we have, and ensuring that we continue to bring that forward in a way that is of service. I think that to me was, in the end, the challenges were the triumphs, and just, live in a space of gratitude for the communities we get to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I mean, I think when this all first started, I mean, we, like all of you, I mean, like we just had to pause everything because it wasn't appropriate, and it wasn't the right time. People are still recovering, and are still dealing with so much, that I think part of it is just kind of like always checking in and making sure that, it's okay to move forward. And I mean, with COVID, everything just seems to change like week by week. I feel like, I mean, things have stabilized now, but there was a very long period of time where it just looked different day by day. So yeah, just starting with making sure that checking in with people and seeing where people are at, and making sure it's even like a good time. And then I think I agree with all of you guys that the challenges were the triumphs. I think the digital divide, I think, was like the biggest, not the biggest, but it was a great challenge in that, we were doing and have been doing so much work like on the ground to try to reach people that, like, when it first happened, we were like, well, now what? But I think that we've been able to creatively find, explore different modes of engagement that we weren't doing before, that I think, and there's also a lot of people who simultaneously, myself included, like are learning about, Zoom and online meetings. Like I had never done one before. And I think we've tried to be a resource and like helping people like figure out how to like set up an account, and like when it's your first meeting, and just kind of walk people through that process. And like Laura said, we've also gone back to phone calls, and I'm actually been really surprised as to like, even when I'm calling people that I don't know, like I feel like people are answering their phones more than they used to. And that's just been interesting to see. And just kind of going back to traditional kind of forms of just connecting with people has been helpful. And we had our Go Valley Park Improvement Project, and it was a project that we've done we started during the pandemic. And I think it's been just really interesting to see the ways that it's like evolved. And at one of our community meetings, we've been partnering with the elementary school, Go Valley Elementary School, to make sure we had some feedback from the kids. I mean, we were improving a playground, and obviously they're the users, and you can't send them a Zoom link. So we really worked with the teacher, and they were able to create some designs of like what their ideal playground was, and having them come to the meeting, and having representatives from the neighborhood association and like other residents too, and like some new folks. It was just really robust and also really fun just to have them see their dragon drawings and just see their like creativity. So it was a really successful meeting, and just a new type of meeting. And I think moving forward, it'll be, I think we'll keep maybe doing like a hybrid as we're able to meet in person, just keep some online elements too for folks who it's more convenient or who would prefer to continue meeting that way.
Yes, that meeting was really fun. That was probably one of the most fun meetings I've ever attended, just because it was full of little kids' faces in every box. And actually that teacher was so instrumental in helping us, because she, throughout the entire year, of course, has been dealing with the digital divide. And we all of a sudden were getting all these people in the waiting room with the same name, and it was her name, and they were using her account to log in so that people who didn't have a Zoom account could easily log in. So that was really cool. We've sort of touched on it through this last question, but I sort of want to specifically talk about, because of these different factors, who do you all feel like we've lost or couldn't reach during this time? And then who did we sort of gain? What kinds of people were now able to access community engagement opportunities maybe for the first time? So Laura, I'm going to let you lead with that.
A really interesting thing that I heard at a recent virtual public meeting was, are you going to keep having these? Because I prefer not to drive to your location downtown or, wherever that may be. And I think, as Cynthia mentioned, I think we're going to have to keep a hybrid moving forward. For those folks who just love the convenience of being able to see this live or being able to log into a meeting and do it from the comfort of their home. And then others who now prefer to be out and kind of giving their feedback. One of the things that I feel like, even though we traditionally feel really comfortable doing outreach to Spanish speaking families and families who just in general are multilingual, I feel like we were still having a hard time during the pandemic getting to these families. And I think it's just primarily because, I think everybody was just in a state of protection and protecting my family and making sure that I had what I needed just to survive during this time. And, I don't see that as a negative or a pro or a con or anything like that. I just see it as it was just a reality of what was happening during the time. And so we always were like, okay, and I think in community engagement, and for those of you that might be listening in, being creative and innovative is the best thing you can do, because something that you're not thinking about might be something that someone is going through. And how am I thinking differently about doing this work? We're constantly doing that in my team. And they're always like, okay, well, you're always stretching our thoughts about this. And I'm like, really, like, once we were feeling good about understanding the virtual reality, we were realizing, okay, these are just a group of people we're reaching, and that maybe had social media and that maybe had the capability to log on. One of the things that we did learn that we thought was really interesting, as you're asking, like how we started reaching people, was going back to the phone, that people could access. They may not have wanted to be on social media, but could log on to a YouTube and could just go to YouTube on their phone and watch it. And we started seeing a lot of our families get on through their phones, or if we posted a survey, it was happening through the phone. And so I think this is a tricky conversation, because I feel like, and part of me also feels a responsibility. Like, I was really open and upfront with our clients and saying, like, you are not going to get half of the people we used to. We need more time to do this work. A lot of times the timelines are difficult that you can't stretch. And so I remember being very honest and upfront, like, are we getting really who we need to, and who are we missing? I think we gained a lot of folks who traditionally like to also be behind a computer, give their feedback. They definitely were tapped in and engaged, but the folks that didn't have that access, I think we definitely missed those opportunities.
I think we learned, and Miriam, hop in here at any point, but, our Future 35 was one of the projects we were working on during COVID. And, we really had to think about, okay, how can we reach, or, first of all, is this appropriate? The timing was such that it's just like, and the scale of I-35, can we really have meaningful conversations about this right now when we're all trying to survive when the protests are happening on I-35? And, how are we really being thoughtful about this approach? And is there space and time for this? And with I-35 in particular, we felt like it's such a critical project that we have to move forward. And we have to do everything we can to reach community members where they are, And so, I think while we didn't, there have been people at the table for this project for 10 years, And so in addition, that was some information, some context, but how do we really think about, in particular with this project, those people who have not been at the table, who have not been invited to the table, who have not been listened to, and in this instance, in some ways, we were building new relationships, folks that we hadn't had the opportunity to sit down with and spend time getting to know and things like that. So I think, in terms of folks we may have missed, I think there's fortunately for this was the beginning of the very beginning of the process. And so hopefully as it moves forward, there's roots in the ground for ways for the community to continue participating. But we really looked at, and Miriam, hop in here in terms of all the efforts we had, both texting, through the phone, call in. We had the radio station that allowed for call-ins. We had the radio, we had the virtual platform. So we had Facebook Live. So we had to really think the dimensionality of how do we reach people where they are in a time when not only, are we just trying to survive, but this is a project of a scale where we really need to make sure we're reaching people, or else we're going to have an outcome that looks a lot like it currently does. So it was imperative in our work to really reach folks that were likely a new audience to a new just a new connection to this type of project. Miriam, yeah.
I just want to add, it doesn't necessarily go with this question, but it piggybacks off of what Meredith just said. We had an interesting, triumph of getting people to understand that it is okay to voice their opinions instead of being told what to do. That happened a lot during this engagement process. It was like, no, we just want to know what's happening. But it's like, no. You get an input. You get a say. And we need you to talk about what you want. Literally, it's all about what do you want for your community, for yourself, for your family. That was a very, very interesting thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great, huge point in terms of new communities coming to the table and thinking about not having had the opportunity before. And so building the capacity amongst the community and thinking about capacity amongst the community, and that really they are driving this project and the vision forward. And to, again, as a community member who had been disenfranchised for generations, thinking about that and wow, does this input really change the course of the future? Does my input actually make that happen? So Mira, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I would just add that I think we've had similar experiences in that we, I think when we first started doing the virtual meetings, I think we weren't really sure what to expect, but I think who we've been able to gain, I think similar to what you all have said, is that I think we've been able to just meet new people who do have the knowledge and do have the access to being able to connect with us digitally. I think one thing that's been interesting to see, or virtually, I think one thing that's been interesting is that we have been able to also deepen existing relationships that we've had with folks who we are already, connected to us, but who throughout this process, I think that we've just been able to connect with more frequency and just kind of get to know them and their neighborhood at a deeper level. And then who we are missing are, obviously the folks who aren't able to engage with us in that way, who don't just aren't aware, even though, despite our best efforts, who still aren't aware that there's opportunities to connect or who aren't able to. So I think that is a miss. And I think that as we return to being able to do more in-person activities, I think that hopefully we'll be able to capture them again. We've been doing like flyer distribution and some block walking throughout, but we used to have, for example, some students from universities come and join with us, and they have their own limitations, that their universities were like recommending. So our scale was much smaller. So I think, as we go back to doing that work, and I think also going back to having our meetings at the park, I think we were able to just meet folks who were just using the park and able to just come and like share their feedback and give their ideas simply by being there. And then also the kids who were, with their families there at the park. So I think trying to find ways, just continue like reaching that group is something that I think we're just going to keep working on as we do both in person and, online activities.
Yeah, and something that we have been thinking about because, our flyers have always been more like an invitation. And now we're sort of thinking, well, how about if our flyers are invitations and informative, like to give people a sense of what's happening at each stage so that they aren't able to participate for some reason, they are at least well informed, and then maybe they can plug in the second meeting. Because we had a lot of people who were, came to the first one, then couldn't come to the second one, then might, and we can't expect for everyone to participate in everything. There's so much going on in people's lives. It's just not reasonable. But if they showed some interest in being engaged, we don't want to, have them lose touch with it just because they weren't able to attend a meeting. So just things like that, I think have kind of changed how we will do things in the future and how we might capture those people that we did miss because they couldn't come to the online meeting, but perhaps we at least gave them some tools, at least gave them some sense that they are still engaged. So just to kind of wrap up our conversation, I want to, on a final note, just sort of ask everybody, it's a big question, look into your crystal balls, if you will, but what does the future hold? And we can just talk near future. I've now learned, don't look too far into the future.
Amen.
Let's talk about, I don't know, the next month or so. But what does the future hold in your mind for community engagement and, kind of getting back out there, so to speak, as conditions improve, as the forecast is looking good, you have things like ACLs happening in the fall, people are like, okay, we can get out there and do things, go to meetings, go to events and that sort of thing. What do you think? How do you think things will start to change in the future? And Meredith, we'll start with you.
Oh,
yeah.
I think from my perspective on engagement, I think there's a level of depth that that we better understand and that will continue to grow. I think, in terms of methodologies and, sort of designing experiences and all of that, I think we'll continue to get creative. I mean, one of my biggest joys is the fact that we get to work with artists a lot, which is always fresh and always a new way of expression and always a different way to think. And so that's always something that for us is just, an exciting component that we always look, that I look forward to. But I think the idea of engagement and the depth and the thoughtfulness and the care and the respect and the trust and the deep human side of engagement, it's much, I think at least for our work and the path that we're on, there's just so much depth and just gratitude and respect and all of those things that sometimes a public meeting doesn't quite get to. It's truly the care that we share together as a community. Anyway, so I think from my perspective, I think we'll continue along that path. It's very, we're really not at a surface level of engagement anymore. And I don't know that we would ever go back to that. There's just a depth and a care, and a respect, and, an excitement to learn from community members with different perspectives, in our work. So I think, other than that, from the creativity side, that's sort of a foundation of our work. And I think the depth, just continues to sort of fuel the passion.
Yeah,
Who's next?
I'll go. I think for us, as I mentioned before, I think looking at continuing, or like doing a hybrid of both, in person and virtual community engagement. I think one thing that I see, as being like extremely important as we move forward is the importance of just acknowledging that, people are at different places in terms of like their comfort level with what they're ready to start doing, or how they're ready to engage. And I think we want to be sure to be respectful of that, and just allow for different opportunities for people to engage with us and whatever feels right to them. So I think we will, continue offering both, so that we can just meet people where they are with that. For now, I think while we are in stage 2, I think I'm not sure when we're going to go back to doing in-person activities, but when that time comes, I think we're fortunate to work in the parks and being in an outdoor space, which I think presents, in itself, just an opportunity for people to feel comfortable and to come together. So I think, when we do get to that point, I think that'll be a space where hopefully people can feel good about returning to that. I think there are some opportunities also to maybe like help, like as we're doing now, and maybe more one-on-one with some of our park adopters, maybe help provide them with maybe just some extra tools or resources they could use as they get back to maybe like hosting their own community meetings like in person, or maybe like doing a hybrid of both, maybe just offering some support to our park adopters as they move into doing this work themselves, as they're also experiencing like the same transition. But yeah, I think we'll just continue to explore just new opportunities for connection based on what we've learned, and as we continue to learn.
So I have a couple of points. I think community fatigue, and also like what community fatigue and is huge, especially like not even community fatigue. I'm like having back-to-back 6 meetings in one day or more, staring at a screen. I mean, I've already gone cross-eyed today looking at the screen, right? So being able to have like travel to meetings, but also have virtual meetings, packing them in, I think it's good, and probably not too healthy. And I hope that it gets healthier. But on the community fatigue side of things, like who is tired of what, and asking them, like, would you rather work on this project or this project? Like that, like, what do they need and want? And what are their levels of excitement on projects is super important. But then it's also on our side of things, it's creating like cool events, which I'm excited about, like creating like virtual, but like in-person events that also are in parks or are interactive with artists. And like, I'm just excited to get back to the cool spaces and parks and just planning. Because virtual events don't take that much planning. It's more stressful because of technology, but now we can use that technology in new ways.
I love it. I'm excited too. I mean, I think, I was thinking about as we were talking, I shared earlier that we recently were out block walking, and this was shared by somebody, a volunteer that was out there. But prior to getting out there, we sent a little card in the mail just telling them, hey, we're going to be out in your community. We're giving these goodie bags, and you'll see us wearing these safety vests, and we're going to be walking. Tell us, come say hi. And one of the volunteers shared that this, older gentleman was waiting in his little lawn chair. And he said, well, you guys said you'd be here between 2 and 4, and this human connection that we're all talking about, right? That we're all excited about. And he was just, I was waiting for you guys. I'm glad you came by. And yeah, it's about 4:00. And then in my personal experience, I went up to, a resident, and she's just like, thank you for being out here. Thank you for doing this. And I think this human connection, which I love and why I'm passionate about the work I do. And I know that you guys are all passionate because we're working with people, and it uplifts you, it inspires you. And I think one of the biggest things, not only do we have lessons learned, but I at least know the colleagues I work with, we raise the bar. And I think we raise the bar because we want other people to know when you're working with the community, you have to be thoughtful. You have to, not take it for granted that they're giving you their time. But more importantly, if you are working on projects where you're changing people's life, this means something. And so I think as a whole, I feel that. And every time as I'm listening to everyone talk, what can I do differently? Or what did I learn from my colleagues? So I can continue to raise this bar of public service. So that's what I leave as my contributing thought about what's next for us.
That's great. I love that we were really able to end on a theme of human connection, which is a really great way to end a conversation, I think. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. And I just, we really appreciate all your time and expertise on the subject. And it was a wonderful conversation. So thank you all again.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for hosting it.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Yeah, to revisit a recorded version of this session, please visit www.austinparks.org/parks-summit. We also welcome you to check out our new podcast, the Austin Parks Cast, which features our summit sessions as well as other bonus content for your park loving enjoyment. You can find us on your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more.